All right. Well, we have been studying the book of Proverbs for a while now, several months at this point, which is pretty cool. And 2 weeks ago, we began this new section in the book of Proverbs. So this section goes from chapter 10 all the way to chapter 22. It's 13 chapters long. And in those 13 chapters, we find 375 short poems. And it's the typical format of what you think of when we talk about Proverbs. You talk about the one or two lines where they compare and contrast each other, and each poem is one verse long. And each poem is called a proverb. Imagine that. And then a couple weeks ago, we also talked about the structure of these poems and the way that they're kind of laid out. And there's not really too much rhyme or reason to these 13 chapters, but Solomon organized them in kind of an organic order, kind of like a natural order that he put them in. And some people actually compare the book of Proverbs, at least this section of the book of Proverbs, to being arranged almost like a conversation that you would have with somebody. Because sometimes one proverb might elaborate on the proverb before it. And actually, we're going to see that several times tonight. Or a proverb might contrast the proverb before it. So usually it's only 2 or 3 at a time that you'll see that. But again, we're going to see that a few times tonight. And a lot of people, like I said, they liken this to be like a conversation. And you can kind of see that with the way that they kind of play off each other. It kind of flows like a conversation would. And some people actually view the chapters from chapter 10 all the way to 22 as kind of running together as just like a long conversation in a way. And the reason why it's 13 chapters long is all these verses just kind of roll into each other. Like I said, there's not really a whole lot of rhyme or reason to them. They just kind of keep going. It's just like a collection of these proverbs. And it makes it really difficult to split that up into smaller sections. So what we've been doing, at least chapter 10 and now chapter 11 tonight, is just going verse by verse for the chapter, and then we call it a day once we get through that chapter. So we're looking at them chapter by chapter. Now, 2 weeks ago, this week, and the next 11 weeks after this, we're going to see practical advice for our daily lives. And it's talking about godly wisdom and talking about how we should, what our outlook should look like. And it's really just a lot of practical advice. These proverbs describe good things, and they also describe bad things. But what's cool is since this is actually a wisdom book, and we've already learned so much about wisdom from this book, sometimes you actually have to use wisdom in order to understand what the proverb is actually saying. So that's a really cool kind of thing there. So this week we're going to continue our deep dive into this book, into the book of Proverbs, and we're going to continue with chapter 11, starting with verse 1. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Now, if you don't know what it's talking about, that verse might not make any sense. But this is speaking of even scales, honest scales. And when you picture Lady Justice or whatever, it's a lady holding scales and she's blindfolded, right? Justice is blind, and it's giving the sense that justice is equal, that the scales are evenly weighted. Now, this concept of a false balance and just weight, this actually goes all the way back to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Leviticus 19 says, "You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight or volume. You shall have accurate balances, accurate weights, etc." And in Deuteronomy 25, it says, "You shall not have in your bag differing weights, one large and one small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a correct and honest weight. You shall have a correct and honest measure." Now, what this is speaking of is, think about sales. If you're buying things by weight, you want to buy what you paid for. You want to have an honest weight. You want it to actually be accurate. Because if it says it's 5 pounds and you're really getting 3.5 pounds, but you're paying for 5 pounds, you're getting ripped off. So it's speaking of that type of social interaction where you can take advantage of some people. And then also in Deuteronomy, it continues, it says, "Everyone who does these things, everyone who acts unjustly is an abomination to the Lord your God." which is very similar to what this proverb says. This is speaking about cheating other people, taking advantage of other people, being dishonest for personal gain. We're meant to be fair. Using uneven weights or manipulated weights, that's, like I said, it's ripping somebody off. It's not fair. And the fact that this verse says that it's an abomination to the Lord shows how much God cares about honesty and fairness. You can see how much he values justice, to be just, to be fair, to be honest. And this verse says God delights in being fair and just. Verse 2, when pride comes, then comes dishonor. But with the humble, there is wisdom. Interesting verse. I'm going to say those words a lot tonight, interesting verse. Or this verse is interesting. I think I typed interesting like 50 times. So pride brings with it dishonor. Closer to the Hebrew, it says, when pride comes, disgrace follows. But on the other side of that coin comes wisdom in humility. We've talked about wisdom being of God. Humility is an important foundation for true wisdom. Humble people know that God is awesome and God is great, and they should be in awe and reverence of God. Humble people tend to look after other people and take care of things. Humble people consider other people to be important, whereas a proud person tends to only think about themselves. So when pride comes, then comes dishonor, but with the humble, there is wisdom. Verse 3, the integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the treacherous will destroy them. So basically, somebody who lives with integrity is considered to be upright. And these people use their integrity to guide them along the way. They live a life without shame or without secrets. They're trustworthy. They're living upright lives. They're what we would consider like a good person. That guy's a good guy. But perversity, or closer to the Hebrew here, it would be crookedness. Crookedness leads to destruction. Again, closer to the Hebrew, it says perversity of the faithless destroys them. Somebody that lives that way, faithlessly, will find destruction. Verse 4, riches do not benefit on the day of wrath, but righteousness rescues from death. Now, in our study in Proverbs, we've already talked about wealth and riches before in this book, and interestingly, we've seen both the importance and value that money has and how important it is here, but also the earthly limitations of money and wealth, because money cannot save you from godly judgment. Yes, money is important and it's valuable, and you can do a lot here to help. You can do a lot here to be generous and change people's lives here, and it's important here, but it's not everything, and it doesn't last forever. And like I said, money cannot save you from godly judgment. Just from a perspective of judgment and justice, if justice is truly blind the way it's depicted, money does not excuse whatever crime was committed. Money doesn't remove guilt, although, yes, now not just now, because even in the study of the 12 minor prophets, we saw this all the time with the perversion of the judicial system, but if somebody commits a crime, they are guilty. And if justice is served, the judge should punish the crime, right? Money does not change the fact that a crime was committed. God is going to be the judge of every person, and we've all done things that go against God. We all deserve punishment or justice for the crimes that we've committed. Our money, our monetary, actual money, our riches, our wealth, cannot save us from God's punishment. Instead, we have to trust in God and strive to live how God tells us and discover Jesus. Righteousness rescues from death. Money does not. Verse 5, the righteousness of the blameless will smooth his way, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. That's pretty self-explanatory right there. The person that's blameless finds a smooth way because they trust in God. The righteousness of the blameless is what smooths the path. It's the righteousness. We've talked about the way or the path being a metaphor for life, life's journey, the path of life. So if you picture that in a way, if you strive to walk with God, your path of life would be smooth. It's the straight and narrow, straight, smooth. but the wicked will fall by their own wickedness. They don't have that same confidence to walk this life that a believer has. They don't have that smooth path. In fact, it says that they'll fall by their own wickedness. Verse 6. A lot of these are going to deal with righteousness and the righteous or the upright and the wicked or the evil. Verse 6 says, the righteousness of the upright will rescue them, but the treacherous will be caught by their own greed. So you can see that this verse goes kind of along with the last verse here. The righteousness of the upright will be rescued. In other words, they will be delivered. If we align ourselves with God, not only will our paths be smooth, but we'll be rescued. And if you know Jesus, then you know that that's absolutely true. The decision to obey God seems like it should be a simple choice. A wise person seeks God and walks with God, and God looks after them, gives them a smooth path, and rescues them. But as we've talked about before in previous chapters, we talked about the foolish person and the nature of the foolish person. A foolish person doesn't want to listen to God's wisdom. They think they know best. So the treacherous will be caught by their own greed. And closer to the Hebrew there, it says the faithless are trapped by their own desires. So just as the upright are delivered by righteousness, the unfaithful will be caught or trapped by their own unfaithful desires. Verse 7. When a wicked person dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of strong people perishes. So this is another interesting one here. The wicked often expect some sort of blessing or honor. But when they die, they won't have it. In fact, we talked about that several weeks ago, about how a righteous person is remembered. We talked about the Hall of Faith in Hebrews, all these people that did amazing things. But then you talked about evil people that did horrible things. They're not remembered very well, right? They don't have a legacy that goes on, a positive legacy. So they're going to, in terms of this verse, the wicked expect some sort of blessing, but when they die, they're not going to have it. In fact, they're going to face God's just judgment in their death, which, if they're wicked and they're not righteous and they haven't discovered that, it's not going to be very fun for them. Whatever they had hoped for in death, their expectation won't happen. It will perish. You can look at it this way. Their hope is in the world, worldly things. They don't have hope in heaven because they're not faithful. So their hope, or what they put their hope in, namely things of this world, it essentially dies when they die. We know that they can't take money with them. Any of the power or fame or riches or whatever they build for themselves here as a wicked person, they're going to lose everything that they achieved in life when they die. Whether it's possessions or money or success, those are worldly things. In death, the evil person will discover that they were wrong all along. And they're going to be judged. And then the second part of that verse says, and the hope of strong people perishes. Now, closer to the Hebrew there, it's the hope of his strength vanishes. So the evil get their strength from all these worldly things and money and power. That's where the evil people get their strength from. And you can imagine they might view death as losing everything. If everything that you built up is your life here on earth, and when you die, you're going to lose all that stuff. All their expectations, everything that they've invested in dies. Their hope in their strength dies. They lose everything. But on the other side of that coin, from a Christian perspective, we see a totally different view of death. Paul wrote this in his letter to the Philippians. He wrote, "For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." We gain in death because we have salvation. See the difference there? Verse 8, the righteous is rescued from trouble, but the wicked takes his place. Now, this is another example of the benefit of righteousness here, the benefit of seeking after God and living a godly life and walking that upright life. The righteous is rescued from trouble. Even if things are horrible here on this earth in our lives, we have hope in the future with God. But as we're going to get to too, we're going to see that God blesses us here as well. But even if things are horrible, because we know that there are faithful people that have experienced horrible things in their lives, we still have hope in salvation. Again, to die is to gain. You can look at it this way. For the righteous, the life here on earth is essentially the worst thing that they're ever going to experience. For the righteous person, for the person that has faith in God, this life is the worst thing that they're going to experience. Isn't that crazy to think about? Whereas for the wicked, their greatest trouble that they're going to experience, the worst thing that they're going to experience, it's coming later. When it says the wicked takes his place, this is meant as in the wicked kind of reaps what he sows. It's not taking the place of the righteous. The wicked takes his place. In other words, he gets what he deserves, kind of thing. The righteous have hope in being rescued from trouble. The wicked don't have that same hope. And this verse and the next verse actually kind of roll into each other. So let me read 8 again, and we'll go into 9. The righteous is rescued from trouble, but the wicked takes his place. With his mouth, the godless person destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous will be rescued. Again, the righteous will be rescued there. Through knowledge, the righteous will be rescued. And we already know that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It makes sense then that through knowledge, the righteous will be rescued. You see that? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and through that knowledge, the righteous will be rescued. Now, as for the first part of that verse, with his mouth, the godless person destroys his neighbor. Love builds each other up. When you love, when you're complimentary, when you exhort, when you're encouraging, that builds people up. But an evil person, I don't know what this sentence was that I was trying to write here. But God's deliverance comes to the righteous through their knowledge. Like I said, the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. We're talking about wisdom in a personal relationship with God. Through knowledge, the righteous will be rescued, but with his mouth, the godless person destroys his neighbor. You have to watch what you say. And we're going to get into that in a couple verses too, just speaking about the power of words and what they can have on other people, and especially for somebody that's in a position of power. So we'll elaborate on that verse in a little bit. Verse 10, when things go well for the righteous, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there's joyful shouting. So we just read how a godless person's word can destroy their neighbor and how important words are. And you can see that in this verse, when evil is in positions of power, when evil oversees a city, for example, nobody wins. That city does not win. When evil is ruling, obviously nobody wins there. You can see that righteousness is beneficial for the entire city, for everyone, but for the wicked, nobody wins. And you can see in this verse, the community rejoices when they're blessed, which is awesome. And as much as the community rejoices over blessings, you see too that they celebrate the judgment of the wicked. Justice is sweet sometimes, and the wicked won't be missed when they're gone. But in this verse, you can assume that everybody suffers to some degree when evil is in positions of power. When evil reigns, everybody suffers. But you can imagine, too, that when that evil is gone, when justice is served and that evil is gone, then the people are free. There will be joyful shouting, because it's liberation. This is why we want good and righteous people to succeed. We want good and righteous people to be in positions of power. Verse 11. By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is torn down. Now, this is one of the verses I was talking about. You can see how this verse goes with the last one and the one before it. And it makes sense. And if we can imagine what a city might look like if it was ruled by evil, you can also imagine if it were run by goodness and righteousness. It's a pretty stark contrast between the two. By the blessing of the good and the righteous, the whole city is blessed. It's good for the entire community. It's good for everybody that's in that city. Their blessing and their prosperity actually even extends beyond themselves to the entire community. But again, going back to the power of words, the words of the wicked can destroy a city. It's torn down, it says. Words can be terrible things. Words are very powerful. The words of evil can destroy an entire city. And if you think about it, think about not just in terms of words like commanding an army or something, but think about words that are plotting against sowing seeds of doubt, conspiring against things. The power of somebody in a position of power is looked at as an authoritative figure, and people take whatever they say as fact. And that can be dangerous if that person is evil. The words of good, though, on the other side of that coin, can be just as powerful. That's important. Verse 12, one who despises his neighbor lacks sense, but a person of understanding keeps silent. I like this verse. This is a good one. It's something that we need all around the world. Wise people tend to love and respect other people. It comes with wisdom. But somebody that despises their neighbor, it says they lack sense. They lack that wisdom. Those that actually have wisdom and that actually have understanding recognize the importance of things like self-control and patience. A person of understanding keeps silent. There's a time and a place to speak up, and there's a time and a place to hold yourself back. And if you truly are wise and you love and respect others, that should encourage you to keep your peace sometimes. Because like I said, words are powerful. What you say matters. And sometimes it's better to say nothing than to possibly be drawn into a situation where you might say the wrong thing. Verse 13. One who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets, but one who is trustworthy conceals a matter. So we know that slander and gossip are things that go against God. And it's not how we should be conducting ourselves. And this verse is speaking of somebody that's known to be a slanderer. It says, one who goes about as a slanderer. They have a reputation of being somebody that does this stuff. They're known as a slanderer. And it's somebody that's known to talk trash. He's a trash talker. These types of people enjoy trash talking, especially when it comes to keeping a secret. This slanderer reveals secrets, and that gives him almost a sense of power. It's like, I know something you don't know, right? It's attractive, and people want to know. Hey, I got a secret. Oh, tell me, right? There's some power behind that. Secrets can be used for their own advancement. These slanderers keep those secrets because secrets can be valuable. The last verse just spoke about the importance of self-control and watching what you say and only speaking when you should speak, keeping our mouths shut, essentially. This verse is very similar. This verse is also about silence because we have to think before we speak in a sense that somebody might hear our secrets. Somebody may be able to have power over us. Those people should be able to trust that their secrets aren't going to get told, that they're not going to be slandered, they're not going to be gossiped about. Now, a wise person and somebody that's trustworthy knows the appropriate time to speak about a matter and knows the appropriate time to have discretion. A wise person knows that. You ever having a private conversation with somebody and somebody walks up and you stop the conversation? Doesn't make sense to be like, oh my gosh, he ripped up his Bible. Yeah, no, I'm talking about Dennis. He ripped up his Bible. He totally ripped up his Bible. You don't do that. There's times to have discretion where you should be concealing whatever you're talking about. There's times when love and wisdom guide privacy. Again, love and respect for others should encourage you to be able to hold your peace and speak properly. Verse 14 says, when there's no guidance, the people fall. But in an abundance of counselors, there's victory. I love this verse. This verse is an awesome proverb. It's a great proverb to memorize and remember. Because plain and simple, people need leadership and guidance. People need it. But luckily, God provides these systems and these structures of authority where we can get guidance. And God gives us guidance himself, but he also gives us people in our lives to help give us guidance. Those in any type of leadership or any type of position of power, they need to be able to give wise counsel. That's part of the responsibility of being in any type of leadership. And it doesn't always happen that way, but that's how it should work. And that's why this verse says, in abundance of counselors, there is victory. It's important to seek multiple counselors. There's a lot of value in receiving opinions and input and information from multiple counselors, an abundance of counselors. Because you can't just go to one person and expect them to know everything about everything. There's not one person that's magically knowledgeable about everything, except for me. I'm just kidding. Only in my marriage. I'm just kidding again. I'm sorry, Katie, if you're watching. But some of us might think we know everything. Some of us might think that our opinion and our knowledge is extremely valuable. But the truth is that multiple counselors brings greater wisdom. It says that there's victory in an abundance of counselors. Brings greater wisdom, and it also brings security and a sense of safety in terms of making those decisions. If you seek wise counsel, if you seek multiple counselors, you can feel better about the decision that you're going to make. Everybody needs advice for whatever you need advice for, which again goes back to words and the importance of words and the fact that words affect the lives of people. A wise person is not afraid to ask for advice, and a wise person is not afraid to receive criticism. Sometimes we need to ask several people before we get the best advice, before we can actually make an informed decision. You hear that, the figure of speech before, making an informed decision? To be informed is to receive counsel. We need to ask several people before we receive the best advice, and this applies to personal life, this applies to religious matters, and this applies to anybody that's in a position of power. You need an abundance of counselors, because in an abundance of counselors there is victory. Verse 15 says, "One who is a guarantor for a stranger will certainly suffer for it, but one who hates being a guarantor is secure." Now this ties back into something that we read back in Proverbs chapter 6. We talked about this before. Basically, to promise to pay the debts of a stranger is asking for trouble. It's not the best decision to make. You're essentially promising to pay the debts of a stranger. You don't know the stipulations of how they got into that debt. You don't know the person, and it's a foolish thing to do. And we should only make a promise if we can actually carry out our promise. And in order to carry out that promise, we need to be informed. If he's a stranger and he has debts, don't jump into his business. We talked about it back in Proverbs chapter 6. And Solomon was writing to his son, and he said that if his son made this mistake of taking on somebody else's debt, he told his son to go humble yourself and be urgent with your neighbor to free yourself. And that he should do all he could to save himself. He should humble himself and be urgent with his neighbor to free himself from that other person's debt. And then the second part of that verse, it says, one who hates a guarantor is secure, because there's security in being responsible only for your own debts, because you only have to worry about what you actually have control over. If somebody else got into a contract or some sort of an obligation with somebody and they have a debt with somebody, that's their personal matter. When you jump into that, you're putting yourself into trouble. So basically, care about your own debts. It's a pretty simple concept. Worry about what you have control over. You don't have control over that debt, even though you get yourself involved in it. You have control over your debt because it's your debt. Verse 16. "A gracious woman attains honor, and ruthless men attain riches." Now, with this one, you can imagine that a gracious woman, picture like a lady, like however you would picture a lady. You picture her with dignity and with honor, and you picture her as being humble, as being modest and virtuous. You picture this gracious woman. That's kind of what you think of, but when you think of a ruthless man or violent man, closer to the Hebrew, there's a stark contrast to a gracious woman. Character and honor are a couple things that are very important to a gracious woman, and people respect that kind of person. People respect somebody with character and with honor, this gracious woman. But a ruthless or a violent man, you can argue they only care about gain, personal gain. They care about riches. It says ruthless men attain riches. And what's interesting here too is some people look at this verse and they don't see that ruthless or violent man in a negative light. Some people don't look at it that way. Some people look at it as a ruthless man is like a cutthroat man. They attain riches because they're ruthless, like, yeah, man stuff, tough guy. But that does not go with the contrast of this verse. It doesn't work. It doesn't seem to work that way. A gracious woman and a ruthless man. It wouldn't make sense to say a gracious woman attains honor, but a cool cutthroat guy gets money. Like they don't go together. They don't contrast each other. The word ruthless or violent here suggests evil and negativity rather than good and positivity. And then also we've talked about too how honor and dignity are more valuable than riches. Verse 17. A merciful person does himself good, but the cruel person does himself harm. Another fairly self-explanatory verse there. This one shows that it says that whoever shows mercy to others will in turn be shown mercy. And Jesus actually said this on his Sermon on the Mount, or during his Sermon on the Mount. In the Beatitudes, he said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will inherit mercy." And in the book of James, it says, "Judgment will be merciless to the one who has shown no mercy." Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy is a good thing, especially for a believer. Mercy is a good thing because there's real benefit in both being merciful and receiving mercy. There's benefit. There's benefit for a person that is kind. We talk about the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated, which broken down very simply when you're speaking to a child is be nice to other people. Plain and simple. God is merciful. He's a merciful God. And he gives us mercy because we know what we've earned, but that's not what God gives us if we discover him and we're faithful. Now, for the person that's not merciful, for the person that's mean and cruel to others, it says a cruel person does himself harm. In other words, he brings it on himself. The cruel person does himself harm. Not to mention that, going back to another quote from Jesus, Jesus said, "For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you." So I would certainly hope that if you're merciful, you want to get mercy in return. Because if you're cruel, you're not going to like what you get in return. The measure that people use for others will be measured to them. So plain and simple, a cruel man causes pain for himself. He causes pain in others. He causes pain in himself. Verse 18. A wicked person earns deceptive wages, but one who sows righteousness gets a true reward. So, sorry. I thought I spelled something wrong, but I didn't. When somebody works with deception, when they earn deceptive wages, and they're working with dishonesty and deception, there's evidence of wickedness there. There's a wickedness to that. Whereas the wise person, the honest person, knows that good work should be done with honesty and integrity. You ever hear that phrase, an honest day's work? If you know you went to work and you didn't do a good job and you sat around and you took advantage of the fact that the boss is on vacation, you feel that. You feel kind of bad about yourself. You don't feel like you earned what you got. Those who do their work in righteousness, ones who sow righteousness, people that work honestly, people that work with integrity, they're going to see the reward of their work. We talked about this before too, the importance of not being lazy and working hard. Righteousness in itself brings reward. Graciousness brings reward. Mercy brings reward. Kindness brings reward. And this is talking about true reward, not of any kind of monetary gain, not talking about financial stuff, not earthly gain. Remember this, Jesus said this, he said, "Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in or steal." Talking about the character of your heart. Verse 19, "One who is steadfast in righteousness attains life, but one who pursues evil attains his own death." Again, this is pretty self-explanatory, especially for a believer. Because just on face value, when you're talking about faith, this concept is kind of a no-brainer, right? Righteousness leads to life. Absolutely. When you cling to Jesus, when you discover who Jesus is and you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you get eternal life. Righteousness leads to life. If you don't do that and you continue to live a sinful life and you're essentially an evil person, evil leads to death. It's kind of self-evident. But it's still a very important idea. It's a very simple proverb, but it's a very important idea because it's talking about life and death. It's talking about eternity. It's kind of the gospel in one verse right there. Verse 20. The perverse in heart are an abomination to the Lord, but the blameless in their walk are his delight. Another cool verse. I like this verse. Is when we think about sin, when we think about human nature and we talk about sin, we kind of think that we just can't help it. Just can't help it. Sin's just part of life. There's nothing we can do about it. That despite our better judgment and whatever we do, we just can't seem to avoid sin. Sin overcomes us. But at the same time, sin is also enjoyable. And it's sought after. People seek after sin. People like to sin. Sinning's fun. People actively sin because they enjoy whatever that sin might be. It wouldn't be tempting if we didn't like it to some degree. You can look at it as being willing participants of sin. You can look at these people as being perverse in heart. The perverse in heart are an abomination to the Lord. God doesn't like it. God doesn't like when you actively seek out sin. But look at the other side of that. It says, the blameless in their walk are his delight. What a cool part of that verse, because if somebody is righteous and they're walking with God, they're seeking after God, they're striving to be faithful, it says God delights in these things. That means that we can bring joy to God. I am always hard on myself, and I will always be hard on myself, and I will always say that I'm not good enough for God, and I will always be hard on myself. My favorite line in that Christmas song, Go Tell It on the Mountain, is, if I am a Christian, I am the least of all. I love that Paul is hard on himself. For some reason, I'm like that. I'm hardwired like that. But to know that I can still bring joy to God, that's incredible. Because I feel like I fail him constantly. But to know that if I walk faithfully, if I say no to that sin and take part in that and actively push that out of my life, God delights in that. To know that God delights in me is mind-blowing. And because of what Jesus did for us, God delights in us as he does his Son. What an honor that is. How cool is that? Verse 21. Be assured the evil person will not go unpunished, but the descendants of the righteous will be rescued. Again, another verse that we see the importance of faith on display here. God's going to judge the evil. He's going to judge the evil person, but God saves the faithful. These last few verses here pretty simply explain faith. In terms of principle, they're fairly simple concepts to grasp, especially for believers, because we're looking at it as good and evil, the faithful and the wicked. They're also really important. They're simplified, but they're still really big concepts to grasp. Bottom line is God wants us to live good lives. He wants us to walk that straight and narrow. He wants us to be faithful and obedient. He wants us to have a relationship with him. The problem is, again, going back to sin, is our nature. That's our problem. Our nature goes against God. And God, being just, must judge sin because he's a just God. So if we want to be good, then God has to help us. So he sent Jesus. We deserve punishment. We know what we've earned. But through grace, we don't need to suffer punishment. Just as Peter wrote in 1 Peter 2, he says, for once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Verse 22. This is a kind of a funny verse right here. As a ring of gold in a pig's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion. So let me break that down a little bit. It's meant to be humorous. Because why would somebody put a nice gold ring in a pig's snout? And granted, we do see depictions of that sometimes in hurting them or whatever, but this is referring to like a nice ring, like something nice and shiny, and you stick it in a pig's nose. It doesn't make sense to do that. Likewise, it doesn't make sense for a beautiful woman to not have discretion. It doesn't make sense for a beautiful woman to not have wisdom and to not have self-control. It doesn't make sense. The influence of her beauty and whatever power she might have in that beauty, it's not enough to make up for her lack of discretion. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work that way. And it's worth noting, too, here that Solomon and his people, the people of Israel, they didn't like pigs. So why would you put nice gold in a gross pig? They believed pigs were unholy. So this unholy, ugly pig doesn't somehow magically become beautiful when you stick a gold ring in its nose. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work that way. In the same way, a foolish woman, a woman who is foolish, is not beautiful. A beautiful woman should be kind and generous. We would hope that she would be wise and godly. Beauty comes from what she does. Again, going back to something that Peter said to kind of elaborate on this a little bit. Peter says in 1 Peter 3, he says, your adornment must not be merely the external, braiding the hair, wearing gold jewelry, or putting on apparel, but it should be hidden, or it should be the hidden person of the heart. It should be your character that makes you beautiful, with the imperishable quality of a gentle, quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. I've witnessed this many times in my life, and I don't know if it's a mental thing or what it is, but the more you get to know somebody, it's almost like their face changes. And if you get to know somebody and they have kind of an ugly personality, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, maybe I'm just weird, but they become ugly, like their personality. That's really harsh of me to say, and I don't mean it to come off that harsh, but I've witnessed that in my life where I'm like, man, like, she looks different, or he looks different. Whereas you see somebody's heart and it's beautiful, and they're kind and they're generous, and you're like, that person's glowing. I don't know. Have you ever witnessed that? Anybody? Okay, good. I'm not crazy. All right, verse 23, the desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath. So the character of a righteous person comes out in their desires. And if they desire to be good, basically a good person or a righteous person, they want good things. And we see this too as you become more mature in your walk and in your faith. You just start to desire good things. You start to push away the negative things. Things become naturally abrasive. Even the way that you speak, we've talked about bad language and the way that you talk. When you become a more mature Christian and you discover that, the way that you talk and hold yourself begins to change. You start to crave good things. An evil person wants evil things. Pretty plain and simple. And God punishes the wicked. The expectation of the wicked is wrath. Verse 24, now this is another one that requires some digging. There is one who scatters and yet increases all the more, and there is one who withholds what is justly due, and yet it results only in poverty. What does that mean? Kind of a weird verse there, but the one who scatters is speaking about somebody that's generous, that's giving. They're scattering, they're giving things out. Paul wrote this in 2 Corinthians. He said, each one must do just as he decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. That's that tithes verse that we love to throw out there. And God is able to make all grace overflow to you, so that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed, as it is written, he scattered abroad, he gave to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. This kind of scattering is talking about generosity. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about giving. Now, to withhold the other side of that, or to be stingy with something, or to hold on to more than what is right to hold on to, it leads to poverty. Now, when we're selfish or we're ungenerous or we're stingy with what God has given us, we should expect that we should get less in return. Because why would we get more if we're not giving more? Eventually leading to poverty. Now, this, arguably, it does kind of go against logic, because from a practical sense, Just thinking about it totally practically, not even talking about what's nice or what's right or what's kind and generous. When somebody gives anything, if I have $20 and I give you $10, I lost $10 from a practical standpoint, right? When a person doesn't give, they save money. If I keep my $20, I got $20. I didn't lose anything. This verse is saying the opposite. It's interesting. It's saying if you withhold, it's going to lead to poverty. But if you give, you're going to get more. Now again, it kind of goes against logic there, but this is not talking about saving money. That's not what this verse is talking about. This is talking about generosity in general. When somebody's generous, God is kind to those that are generous. Sometimes God might give you a little more. And it might not be money, it might not be whatever it is. But look what Luke said, or look what Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke. It says, "Give and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." That means overflowing. "By your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return." You give and you get. Verse 25, continuing along the lines of being generous, says, "A generous person will be prosperous, and the one who gives others plenty of water will himself be given plenty." Again, it goes right along those same lines. This ties it right into the last verse, and it ties into what Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke. God is generous to those that are generous. In fact, in the book of Acts, quoting Jesus once again, Jesus is referenced saying, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." We shouldn't even be thinking about what type of gain we're getting. We should just be giving with whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be money. Again, it could be food. It could be time. It could be an ear. It could be in terms of listening, not like physically. You know what I mean? Just be there for people. Give. Verse 26. "One who withholds grain, the people will curse him, but the blessing will be on the head of him who sells it." Now this is again keeping with the generosity kind of theme here, tying in generosity and being stingy again. But this is coming from like a business point of view. It's talking about buying and selling grain. So look at it this way. It's talking about the seller of grain that's refusing to sell his grain in hopes to kind of manipulate the market to gain a higher price later. It's kind of forcing supply and demand. He's being stingy. He's being selfish. He's being greedy. It's not generous. And guess what? It's going to lead to people cursing him. And absolutely, if you think about it from a practical sense, that's what's going to happen. If I got all the stuff that you want, I'm going to wait to sell it and to make it more valuable, you're going to say I'm a jerk. It's selfish and not generous. It leads to people cursing him. And the nature of God, if you think about God, God is a generous God. So a righteous person, somebody seeking after God, somebody seeking to be godly, would be a generous person. You would expect that. Which is why the second part of that verse says that blessing will be on the head of him who sells. The one who does a good deed, the one who is doing good, is providing grain or goods or whatever it is at a reasonable price. And it says that they'll be blessed by the community. Blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. And this isn't talking about giving away stuff for free. This isn't even talking about giving it to people on sale. It's just talking about not ripping people off. It's talking about greedy people. This is talking about just charge what it's worth. You know, and obviously if you have a business to run, it's okay to make a little bit of profit or whatever. This is saying don't be stingy. Don't take advantage of people. Don't be greedy. In business, just by being fair, you're generous. And you'll be blessed. Verse 27. "One who diligently seeks good seeks favor, but one who seeks evil, evil will come to him." Now this is worded a little weird here in the New American Standard. Closer to the Hebrew it says, "He who searches out good finds favor." It's easier to understand that way. Seeking good brings favor, but seeking evil brings trouble. Seeking good finds favor. Seeking evil finds evil. Pretty self-explanatory there when it's broken down. And this is good for good people, people that are striving to be righteous, people that are working on that, because if they diligently seek good, they're going to discover good. But there's punishment for whoever's seeking evil. Again, it totally just makes sense right there. If you're out looking for good stuff, you're going to find good stuff. If you're out looking for trouble, you're going to find trouble. Verse 28. I wonder how many of these, I'm going to do some research and try to find out if the normal sayings that we have, like, well, if you're, like that one, if you go out looking for trouble, you're going to find it. I wonder if that really came from this proverb, and just over time, then it sounds like that. I don't know why it had a southern accent on it, but one who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf. That's Proverbs 11:28. Another good verse here. And it's interesting too, because this book actually addresses money a lot. But I think it's important that it talks about money, because we live in a very money world. We live in a world that places money above all else. I'm blown away at how many people would sign up for, hit for hire or whatever for like nothing. It's crazy. I don't understand why people value money so much. I don't know if you ever watch like true crime stuff or like the First 48 or whatever. These people will do a hit for like $600. Like, you don't value human life at all. $600? It's not even a third of rent. Anyway, this book addresses money a lot, and it's good because we live in a world that places money above anything. The price, there's a price for everything. Have you heard that? Because there really is. Thankfully, we have a God that gives us his word that teaches us the value of money and the importance of money and wealth. And it shows us that money is important, because we know each one of us has a house payment. Each one of us has a car and gas. And I try to teach my kids, every single thing you do costs money. Driving to work costs money. Driving home from work, turning on the light, flushing the toilet, everything costs money. But it also teaches us to never fully trust in riches. Because how many of us got hit financially during COVID? How many of us, 2 months ago, their wife quit their job and we've been pinching pennies for the last 2 months? Right? Money's important, but we should never fully trust in our money, because we never know what's going to happen. To put trust in riches is to essentially invite our own fall. One who trusts in his riches will fall. The righteous person trusts in God, not in money. And when they do that, when you trust in God, even when you trust in God for your finances, I always pray for my marriage, my children, and my finances, and my church. Those are like the ones, the main things that I pray for. And by doing that, by trusting in God and not solely in money, it leads to the righteous person flourishing like the green leaf. Because monetary wealth on this earth does not really matter. Yes, you can use it for benefit, and you can give, and you can be kind, and you can help the church grow, and money is important. But wealth doesn't really matter. If somebody's wealthy, that's fine, that's great, but we cannot completely trust in wealth. We trust in God. Verse 29, one who troubles his own house will inherit wind, and the foolish will be servant to the wise-hearted. Now, interesting verse here. Now, it's worded a little bit weird in the New American Standard, because one who troubles his own house will inherit wind. That's not a normal sentence to read. But look at it this way. A person that brings troubles to his family is bringing a storm on them. We always talk about the storms of life. To inherit wind is to have storms and troubles. Whereas a foolish person should expect to end up working for a wise person, essentially. The foolish will be a servant to the wise-hearted. Basically, this is highlighting the fact that the foolish person is essentially going to wind up where they don't want to be. One who troubles his own house will inherit wind. Verse 30, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and one who is wise gains souls. Another cool verse. And You can know a person's heart by their fruit. We talked about this several weeks ago in our study in the four Gospels in chronological order. But a righteous tree bears good fruit. A righteous life bears good fruit. And you can essentially give life to others. You can reach others. You can help others. This verse describes one of the benefits that comes with godly wisdom. One of the greatest fruits of having godly wisdom is to be able to win souls for God and to further his kingdom. One who is wise gains souls. They share the gospel. They talk to other people. We can help bring God's life to other people. We can witness to people. And our wisdom can show other people the way to God. And there's another reason why wisdom is so important. Or that is another reason why wisdom is so important, why we're studying this book. And then we close today with verse 31. It says, if the righteous will be repaid on the earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner? Man, that's a deep verse. We close tonight with that verse, and again, it's another interesting verse. What's cool is that it shows that the righteous do get rewards here on earth. We tend to think about all the rewards being in heaven, and yes, the real reward is in heaven, but you can't say that you don't benefit from righteousness here and now, because we do. Because you have hope. You have hope in the future. You have hope in salvation. You have hope in heaven. You feel the love of God. You become a child of God, grafted into his family. You get to see God moving all over the place. You get to see God's intelligent design everywhere. You get to receive the fruits of the Spirit, which are incredible by themselves. Those 9 fruits of the Spirit are amazing. Those are everything that we crave as human beings, God gives us as a gift in the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Everything that we wish we had. All valuable, awesome things. A righteous life is a blessed life. Yeah, you're going to have hardship here on earth. Sorry, that comes with the territory, but you can't say that you're not blessed. All of these things are absolutely wonderful. But, as we do in Proverbs, think of the other side of that. You got to look at the contrast. How much more is this true of the wicked and the sinner? Think about how incredible those things are and what we get to look forward to. You can look at it this way. God is fair with everyone. He's a just God. The good person, the righteous person will receive good things. God will provide for them. But God is also fair and just with evil people. And they will receive a fair punishment. That's Proverbs chapter 11. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your word, and thank you so much for your wisdom, God. I just pray that you continue to work on us, God. Continue to teach us and educate us, God, and help us to scratch the surface of your wisdom, God. Just educate us, God. Give us more. We want to grow closer to you. We want to see your nature, God. We want to see you moving. We want to see your design, not just around us, God, but in our lives and what our future looks like, God, and what your plan has always been with your Son and with salvation, God, and how you deal with sin. God, you're so amazing. We've been learning so much about you and your nature from the 12 minor prophets. When we saw how much love there was in that book, we as a society, we look at it as this vengeful, wrathful God, but there's so much love there. It's discipline. You're course correcting. You care. You love us. You want to help us. And again, in these Proverbs, God, we're learning how to live lives in a godly way. So we ask that you just continue to guide us and lead us, God. Build us up, strengthen us, give us courage to be able to share what you've done for us and to be able to share the truth of what's to come and to be able to share the hope of salvation and of heaven. So God, we thank you so much for everything you're doing in our lives. We ask that you continue to make your presence known, God, and help us to be cognizant of your presence in our lives and everything you're doing in our lives. And with everything, God, we love you so much and we trust you. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.